Chapter 7. The Graveyard. The reason he thought Fei Xia was puzzled was, didn't that father of his always leave this bastard son of his alone? Why would he send a teacher here? It would be fine if he was teaching reading, but why would he send such an old pervert to teach himself? Seeing that the other party knew Uncle Wu Zhu, Fan Xian knew that it was not his turn to intervene in this matter, and pretended to be dumb and sat on the bed. Only after the adults had made things clear did Fan Xian use his little arm to remove the sheet from teacher Fei Jia's body, and then hid behind 5 bamboo giggling and playing the demented child. Unfortunately, after showing a small hand today, both of these two powerful figures in front of him knew that the brain of this 4-year-old boy in front of them was very uncomplicated. The sky is already slightly bright. In the distance there is a faint sound of chickens crowing and the sound of underlings boiling water. 5 bamboo led Fei Jia out the door and left. Only before he left, Fan Xian's ears heard a cold phrase coming from 5 bamboo. When are you going to explain why you know who I am? Fan Xian's heart thumped in his chest, not really knowing how to explain. When he had traveled thousands of miles with Uncle 5 Bamboos to Tanta State 4 years ago, he was still a baby only a few months old. He thought and thought about it, but he could never find a good excuse, and he only blamed it on the fact that he had been so frightened by that weird old man Fei Jia at the time. As Tanyu City began to wake up from its slumber, the small, unassuming grocery store showed no signs of being open. Inside a darkened room in the store, Gojutsu looked coldly at Fisuk. What does the cripple mean? Although Fei Jia could be called a great man of his generation in some aspects, when he thought of the rumored cold-bloodedness and venom of this blind boy in front of him, he could not help but feel a bit anxious and replied, "Young master will always grow up, and in the future, he will always be faced with those things in Kyoto, so if he prepares earlier, he will have more chances to win in the future." Wu Zhu raised his head and gave him a look. Although he knew that the other party was blind, but Fei Jia always felt that behind that black cloth there were 2 light that was enough to kill people are staring at him. He smiled and said, "If the 5 big people have opinions, I can immediately go back to Kyoto. I believe that the Lord will respect your opinion." The 5 bamboo shook his head. "I think the cripple asked you to come. It shouldn't be that simple." Not bad. Fisuk thought to himself that only this fellow in front of him dared to call the Dean-sama a cripple. He bent his body and replied, "My lord has not been able to find that chest left behind by the young lady, and is very worried that it will be found by those who have a mind to find it, so I would like to ask the 5 great men to point out the way." "There's no need to look for it. Miss already destroyed that chest before she passed away," the 5 bamboo said with an expressionless face. Fei Jia nodded and turned to leave. Suddenly frowning again, he said, "I always feel that there is something strange about the young master, 5th great person. He is only 4 years old. You let him practice such an overbearing true chi technique. Aren't you afraid that something will happen? The strangeness is still behind. I didn't teach him his true chi technique either." 5 bamboo looked at this poisonous creature that was about to become the young master's teacher and said indifferently, "It'll be hard on you." Fei Suo touched the vaguely painful wound on his head, always feeling as if there was some kind of bad omen in these words. He smiled bitterly and took his leave. After he left, blind man Wu Zhu entered a secret room in the grocery store and stared blankly at a dusty box in the corner, the piece of black cloth still covering his eyes, but it could be clearly seen that he was thinking about something. During the daytime, a strange gentleman came to the Earl's alibi house, and after submitting his name card, he was personally received by the old madam, and somehow gained her trust, and began to serve as the 2nd gentleman for the young master of the Fan family. The maids had long since spread the word about this, all wondering how a guy with a gauze wrapped around his head and looking like an old rogue could be qualified to be their own lovely young master's gentleman. In the study, Fan Xian was being good and lovely as he pounded Mr. Fei's back. Having knocked the man on his smothered pillow last night, he had to hurry to please and curry favor at this time. "Teacher, you can't blame the student for this." He spoke in a milky voice, feeling quite disgusted in his own heart. "You take a knife. The student is young, so he was a bit impulsive." Fei Jie thought to himself not to take a knife how to pry open that door. He is just ready to sneak to see what this legendary bastard looks like, who knows the little child family, actually not sleeping in the middle of the night and playing insomnia. So there is this misunderstanding is also inevitable. Just the back of the head is still a little painful, unfortunately, and the future must find a way to get this debt back. I thought the teacher would quietly come to teach me. Not bad. In many stories in the legends of the Jianghu, it's not uncommon for a young man who is alone in a small garden to stumble upon a windswept outsider and learn an amazing art, while the people around him know nothing about it. Fan Xian looked bitterly at teacher Fei Jie and listened to him. But not everyone in this world is a fool, and since you're not my daughter-in-law, I don't like climbing the walls every day. Fei Jie's face didn't look too good as he looked at the little boy in front of him, so since I'm able to have an identity, it's better to use that identity to teach you. Fan Xian hemmed and hawed and climbed onto his lap and sat down. Teacher, you know my father, right? What kind of person is he? Fei Jie's face flushed green and red, knowing full well that this little guy in front of him had a belly full of viciousness and was still playing naive in front of him. A feeling of muddled powerlessness was born in his own body. Hearing the other party ask a question, he thought about it for a moment before answering. Lord Earl is a friend of my superior, so he asked me to teach you, so you'd be better off to call me teacher from now on. Teacher? Then what are you planning to teach me? Fei Suo hemmed and hawed. A demonic light flashed in the pupils of his slightly brown eyes. I only know how to use poison, so I've come to teach you how to use poison to kill people and how not to be poisoned by others. Originally thought that this sentence can scare the little kid to cry, but Fei Jie immediately thought that the little kid in front of himself is not an ordinary person. This trick is estimated to be useless. As expected, Fan Xian's big eyes were full of excitement, his long eyelashes blinking to look particularly interested. Then what are you waiting for? Do you want me to catch a few rabbits to use as test subjects? If rabbits are no good, then use toads? Fei Jie foolishly turned around, thinking to himself, is this little guy really only 4 years old? A few months later, in the chaotic graveyard, which is about a dozen miles away from Tanyu Port, in the slightly white eastern sky, the faint morning light, sprinkled in the dark graveyard, made this land look even more haunted. Fei Sup caged his hands and stood outside the graveyard, looking at the young master who was squatting in the grave pit. His eyebrows trembled slightly for a few moments. This time, it was a few days' leave from the old madam of the Earl's residence under the pretext of a trip, bringing Fan Xian to the graveyard to dig up corpses and use it to learn about human body structure. Although he knew that young Master Fan Xian was a lot different from the average schoolboy, when Fei Jie saw that Fan Xian had actually gotten used to the eerie atmosphere of the graveyard after only a short while, and had actually stabilized his mind so quickly, and began to start dissecting the corpses in the graveyard in accordance with what he had learned about it over the course of the month, Fei Jie was pretty much in shock himself. He had always been the professional who dealt with these dead bodies, but he had never seen a 4-year-old boy who could face a corpse so smoothly. The grave pit stank of filth, and a pretty, clean little boy wearing a big mask. His tiny hands were dragging sticky clumps of intestines outward from a half-rotted corpse. The scene was horrible, and Fan Xian felt that his second life was still miserable.